Hey everyone, so in today's video I wanted to take a look at the biggest ship in the game that's currently available to players, which is the 890 Jump. Without the two main things that the 890 Jump will be good at in game yet, which I would say are touring and luxury passenger transport, you have to be creative to find a use for this big boat. And while a lot of the things I'm going to show in this video aren't really practical, I had a lot of fun with it and it really shows off how much freedom you have in Star Citizen. Before we get started though, please consider supporting the channel by leaving a like or subscribing. I really appreciate all of you who do that. Okay, so while the title is a bit of a joke, the 890 really does have quite a bit of hangar space, especially for a ship that's not really designed to be a carrier. In this video I want to explore some of the possibilities for using that space, and I'm going to start with some of the more practical examples and then move to some fun ones that aren't the most practical. But even with this not being a focused carrier like something like the Idris or Kraken is, you can still pack a ton of ships in it if you're careful in the way that you park them. Now if you're going to want to be able to launch them quickly in a combat situation, you probably don't want to go too crazy. But it's not all that unreasonable to fit something like 3 arrows into this hangar. Now you see here we did it using an 85X, M50 and 1 arrow, but it could definitely be done with 3 arrows and there'd still be a decent amount of room. I just don't have that many of them. However, 3 arrows is quite a bit of firepower, and combined with the 890's massive shield health pool and decent armaments, you've got quite a little strike force. Now you'll see here in some of the other examples that when we were loading up the ships, we often use the feature of the 890's hangar to use the floor as an elevator, which can make loading some ships a little bit easier, but I think when you're trying to fit a lot of stuff in there, you probably want to just open the hangar doors and not raise the platform. You could see that even with just 3 ships on it here, they bounce around quite a bit as the elevator is lowering, and with any more than that, it could have gone wrong real quickly. Okay, so you can see that 3 ships fit quite nicely, but what about more? So unfortunately, I had a lot of issues testing this. I think in order to keep people from crippling the servers, CIG has limited how many vehicles one person can have spawned at a time, because I tried to load this ship up a decent number of times and I never made it past 4 ships. I don't think this was due to the ship despawn bug either, where sometimes your ship will despawn after an hour or so if you leave it, because it still happened on the attempt I made when I spawned the 890 at Grimhex and immediately made my way to an outpost over on Cellin. But yeah, every time I'd get to the 3rd or 4th ship that I was trying to load up, everything besides that one last ship would just disappear. It wouldn't even get stored either, I would just have to claim them, which was a real pain with the 890. It was not fun waiting for that 2-hour claim time or paying the 20,000 alpha UC to get it faster, and it still took 20 minutes. I might have been able to get around this bug by asking some other people to help me out with it, and I might do so in the future, but it's pretty annoying how temperamental it is, and if it disappears about 40 minutes into the loading process, that's a lot of wasted time. But I think just from the testing that I was able to get done by trying it so many times, I do have a pretty good idea of how many ships you can fit in here. It's probably around 5 or 6 M50 or 85X sized ships, or probably at least 10 Merlins. It's hard to tell with those because they're so small, but I think 10 would be a pretty reasonable number where you wouldn't have to get too creative with the parking. Now I think both of those configurations are about comparable in terms of raw DPS compared to just having 3 arrows, but I really like the idea of just showing up somewhere in this luxury yacht and unleashing a swarm of interceptors. So if you are going to do this, I think I'd go with the M50s over the 85Xs because they're faster and have better weapon hardpoints, but the rental fees were way lower for the 85X, and when you're renting 5 ships they add up quickly, so that's why I went with those. Also, I do wish the Merlin could be spawned at outposts on the vehicle pads. I think it's probably an oversight that you can't right now, because I don't see any reason why you'd be able to spawn M50s and 85Xs but not the Merlin. The Merlin is definitely smaller, and it could be pretty useful to have access to on a moon. Also, another glitch I ran into was that the ballista can't be spawned anywhere except for planetary garages. I wasn't able to get it to spawn at any outposts, which can be quite annoying, especially with how long it takes to get anywhere in the 890 Jump, so just be aware of that. For right now, you can't spawn the ballista anywhere except for New Babbage. So while stuffing M50s into an 890 isn't all that useful right now when we only have access to the Stanton system, it might be useful in the future as a very extra racing transport when you don't want to be taking your racing ship from system to system and putting extra wear on those components. I am looking forward to racing finally being implemented into the game, but for now though, this does give you an opportunity to use the Merlin at least, since it doesn't have its own quantum drive and needs to be taken places by a larger ship, and for now the 890 is pretty good at doing this, at least until 3.13 when the Constellation will be able to do that job with a lot more convenience than the 890 can. But yeah, the main hangar in the 890 is quite spacious, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the Polaris sometime in the near future and what we can fit into its slightly bigger hangar. That extra bit of space could make a really big difference. So instead of fitting a lot of little ships into the hangar, what about fitting one bigger ship into the A90? So the one bigger ship I decided to try out was the Eclipse, because this is another configuration that might be somewhat useful at some point once the range of smaller ships becomes limiting. It might be useful to deliver an Eclipse somewhere in an 890, and in the case of a stealth-focused mission, it might even be one of the better options. Who's gonna suspect that a luxury touring ship is gonna be sneaking a stealth bomber into range of a target? It's not the most practical again, but I could see it actually being useful. So again, in these clips I was trying to load the Eclipse in there using the elevator, and while I did eventually get it to work, I think it would be easier to just have opened the hangar doors and try to manually lower it in. It fits into the hangar, but just barely, so you have to line it up pretty much perfectly when you're landing on the elevator to get it to drop in without clipping the sides. If you don't, this is what happens. Ouch. Thankfully, the pilot was somehow not harmed and was able to fly away from the incident. Once you do get it into the hangar though, it's not as tight as you might think walking around it because of the area around the outside of the landing pad. I think that once repair tools get added, you might even have enough room to do light repairs in here. So again, this definitely isn't an intended use case for this ship, but it's not too ridiculous and it might actually be usable. Next, I want to move on to the rear of this ship and talk a little bit about the cargo bay. So for now, there are some issues with this that make it very hard to explore its full potential for now, but in the future I could see this being used to almost double your carrying capacity, although this is a bit more janky than cramming ships into the front. So one thing the 890 jump can do right now that no other ship can is carry a ballista in this massive cargo space. As you can see here though, if you try to load it up solo, you're going to run into some problems. I've heard from some people that you can avoid vehicles clipping through elevators like this by having someone sit in the driver's seat of whatever you're trying to load, but I didn't do that here and you can see the outcome. You get the idea though, it does fit, it's just the elevator doesn't work, and until next patch when we get the Starlifter, if you want to bring a ballista anywhere, you need one of these. But as I'm sure you can imagine, there's a lot of other combinations of vehicles that can fit on this lift since the ballista fits on here, and if you do manage to get whatever is on the lift into the ship successfully, there's even more space for things up there. So you can see here I'm trying out a nice combo of an Ursa Rover and an M50, and again it doesn't go too well, but it's mainly the elevator's fault. If the elevator didn't shift things around so much, it might have worked. There's enough space on the lift for both, but with how things jump around once it's moving, things that have to be lined up this carefully are just not going to work for now. So once they get lifts to be a little less glitchy, I think there will be a lot more possibilities for this rear cargo area, but another change I'd like to see that would help with loading up this area is being able to open the airlock doors independently from the elevator in the cargo area. So you can see here as you deploy the lift, once you get down to a certain point, the doors close above you to act as an airlock, which is a nice feature in most situations, but if the doors weren't there, it would be a lot easier to load flying vehicles into the cargo hold. M50s and such would be a bit of a squeeze to get up in there, but you could pretty easily fit a nice complement of 5 or so Merlins I think in this cargo area. So you probably get the idea from the examples I showed here. This rear area has a lot of potential to really turn the 890 into a mini carrier, and I think you could probably get 15 Merlins into it in total if you load them into both the front and rear area, which is pretty crazy. And then in terms of the amount of ground vehicles you could fit back here, it's definitely a big number, but with the current utility of most ground vehicles besides the Rock and the issues I was having with the elevator, I didn't explore that too much. But I will say that it will probably be able to carry as many ground vehicles as you have the patience to load. Okay, so the last thing I want to show off are some really impractical but entertaining vehicles that you can load onto the 890. So the side airlocks on the 890 aren't that big, but if you ram hard enough, you can just about get the space bikes into the ships through them. It took a really long time, a lot of ramming, and a lot of damage to both the 890 and the bike, but we were able to somehow squeeze this Dragonfly into the main atrium. I really wish you could adjust the ride height on these bikes though, because if they didn't float so high off the ground, it actually wouldn't be too hard to get them through here. The size of the bikes isn't too big for the airlock, it's just how high they like to float off the ground. Being constantly pushed into the ceiling like this once you're in the airlock makes it very difficult. CIG, please let us do this. I think everyone would appreciate the massive quality of life improvement we'd get from being able to put Dragonflies into the 890. Once you do manage to get the bike into the atrium here though, I don't think you'd really be able to get it out again, but hey, if you're going to use the 890 for its intended purpose and throw a party in here, it'd be kinda cool to have a bike floating around. Although be careful that whoever you let ride it hasn't made too many trips to the bar beforehand. This is pretty hard to replicate though, because I did later try it with a Nox, which you think would be easier to fit in because of how much smaller it is than the Dragonfly, but I actually couldn't manage to do it. I wouldn't recommend trying this at home, but if you do, be sure to set your ICU in the medbay beforehand. So you can see that while I was able to get a pretty decent number and variety of ships loaded onto the 890, in trying to do so I definitely ran into a lot of issues, and I just want to briefly go over some of them. The biggest and most obvious one I think though is just how much time it takes to do so. So while I don't think the feature that'll let you spawn ships with other vehicles inside of them will let you have quite as many ships as I was able to cram in at some points, I definitely will take that trade-off for the convenience of that feature. It would be nice to have a smaller craft available in these big ships to do surface landings, but for now it's not worth the hassle of getting your big ship out, flying it far enough away from the station so that it doesn't get stored, going back into the station, retrieving your other ship, and then finally landing it in the hangar of your bigger ship. So that feature will hopefully be coming sometime this year, but I hope to see some of the other bugs I ran into get fixed as well. So I think the most important one is the problem with lifts when they have vehicles on them, because that affects a whole lot of ships, including some more popular ones like the Constellations and the 600i. I think I've heard a lot of it comes down to server performance, because as the elevator moves through different states, if the server is lagging, it'll sometimes jump from one state to another state. So this might be sticking around until we get server meshing, but it's really annoying, and it makes it so that if you want to bring vehicles anywhere, you really want to ship with a ramp. I guess it's good we're getting the C2 and M2 soon. And then the last big bug was what you saw with my ships disappearing. So I'm completely on board with this being a thing for now while server performance is so bad, but in the future this shouldn't happen. Star Citizen is all about freedom to do what you want and persistence, so I should be able to stuff as many ships as I want to into my hangar. Whether or not they survive a quantum jump is another thing, but they shouldn't just be disappearing. So yeah, there's definitely improvements to be made, but for now I'm pretty satisfied that I can bring a couple of ships along with me, and it sure is a lot of fun trying to figure out what the best combination is. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this are, or what ships you'd use alongside an 890 jump. If you want to support the channel, please do subscribe and or like the video, and thanks for watching.